In this video, we're going to talk about the properties of radicals. And then we will use some of those properties of radicals to simplify some radical expressions. So let's take a look at our list of properties here. So if we look at our first property, here we see that if we have a base raised to an exponent inside of a radical, that can move to the outside, and we just add in some parentheses to include that whole radical. It works forwards and backwards as well. You could also rewrite it going this direction. Okay? So let's take a look at our second property. So here we see that we actually have two bases. We have a base A and we have a base B. And both of these have been written to they're the same roots. They're both the nth root. So because they're the same root, we're able to just multiply those together and say that we have A times B and put them underneath the same radical. And again, that can go backwards as well, where you can undo them. So for our third property, here we see a fraction, and we have a base A and we have a base B, and both of them are to the same root, except now they're in a fraction. And that's okay. We still can put them together, but instead of multiply them, now we get to divide them. So we have our A, oops, that's the wrong color. We have our A and we have our B. And again, the only thing that's different is that this time we are dividing them, but that root's going to stay the same. And we just don't want our B to be 0 because we can't divide by 0. And this works also going backwards. You can pull them apart if you need to. So the fourth property is a radical inside of a radical. That can be a little bit crazy sometimes. So here we have an exponent that's an m. So we have an mth root of an nth root of our base of A. So what we're able to do there is we were able to multiply our m and our n together. So we'll have the m times n root of A. That's a little bit messy, so let's just clean that up a little bit. The m times n root of A, we can multiply those together. Let's get rid of that circle just to make it a little bit easier. Okay, so our fifth property, here we have the nth root of A raised to the nth power. Now notice that we have our parentheses and our n is outside of those parentheses. Here on the inside. So we know from our first property that we can take that n from the outside and it can actually move onto the inside as well. So what we're able to do there is simply cross off the root and the power, and they undo each other, and we're left with just our base of A. Now, the sixth property has two different terms. It just depends on if our n value is even or if our n value is odd. Now, if our n value is even and we have the nth root of n, the nth root of A to the n rather, then our answer is going to be the absolute value of A. But if our n is an odd, then the nth root of A to the n will just be our base of A. And there's some great examples of why if we look just to our right. Remember, we talked about how if we have an odd root, you're allowed to have a negative on the inside of a radical. Now there happens to be a common special case of that sixth property. So let's move it so we can see that. So let's move up. So a common special property of that sixth property is that if you have the square root of A squared, we actually see that a lot. Remember, a square root has that little invisible 2 right there. We're going to end up just getting the absolute value of A. So again, it is a common special case. So be on the lookout for that. Let's do a few examples where we're using these properties to simplify. So here we have a square root of 8 and a square root of 2. Now remember, these are square roots, so their end value is 2. So using our property, in fact, we're going to be using our second property, we're able to put those together. And so we're going to have the square root of 8 times 2, which is the square root of 16, which we know the answer to that is 4, which is a simplified answer because we can't break it down any farther. So let's look at our second property, or our second example rather. Here we have an example of our fifth property where we have our parentheses and we have our cubed root and our 3 on the outside. And so we are able to just cross those off. So we're going to drop off the root, we're going to drop off the 3, and that's going to leave us with simply an answer of A. So in this case, 5. And because it's simplified into its lowest terms, we're done. So let's look at our next example. Here we have the cubed root of x to the third. So here we have an example of our sixth property. So we're going to take a look at our end value, and we see that our end value is odd, which means that our answer should just be our A value, which is x, because those will cancel out just like they kind of did in B. So if we take a look at our example D, it's also a special case for our property, our sixth property, where we have an even n value. And so here we see a very similar thing. If we follow that, then our answer should be the absolute value of y, which in this case is going to be our final answer, because we don't know if y is positive or negative. So that would be our final answer there. And we're finished.